Trying to.
Yep. Good evening, Ben.
Good evening,
Very well. There's some slight technical. Let me just test this. See if I can, because there's some echo. Yeah, hi.
Right, let's go back live. There we go. Okay. Speak now.
Yep.
That sounds better on my end, gents.
Oh, hi, Ben. Yeah. So is it okay to call you Ben and not Benjamin, or how you?
Yeah, Ben is fine.
Right. Well, thank you very much for joining us. I know you're a very busy director. You've got lots of projects in hand. Great to have you on the show. How are things generally?
Yeah, good. Thank you. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, really good. Thank you.
Great. Well, tell us about your early life. I mean, were you always in the north of England, or have you moved there from the south? Or?
No, I was born and bred in South Manchester. And I think when I decided on a career in TV, I always assumed that I would probably have to move to London. But then I've been fortunate to have always worked in the Northwest. So I've been very, very lucky and very fortunate.
Right. And how was so? I guess you went to a local school in Manchester.
Yeah, that's right. I went to a grammar school in South Manchester. Had a pretty ordinary upbringing.
Right. And how were your junior school days when you started doing your GCSEs and those sort of exams? How did you cope with that?
Yeah, I mean, I was fairly studious at school. I think I was a good kid. I worked hard. I got fairly good GCSEs and fairly good A levels as well when I went to sixth form. So nothing out of the ordinary, I guess.
Right. Okay. Well, after school, I mean, at school, did you have any idea where your career path would lead you to?
No, it's funny. Like when I look back to being a really young kid, I really wanted to be a cameraman. I don't know. I must have seen something on TV about cameramen, or my dad had a kind of a little handy cam that he used to film me and my sister when we were growing up. And so very early on, that's what I wanted to do. And then as I got into secondary school, I became a bit more kind of obsessed with computers, and so always thought I would work in IT or something like that. But it was when I was choosing which university to go to that I heard about Leeds University having this like fantastic communications course. And I decided, I think fairly last minute actually, that that's what I wanted to go and do. It sounded like fun. And so that's what I chose to do.
Right. And so you went to higher education, got more qualifications, and
yes. So went to Leeds University, got a BA in media production or broadcasting as it was called then. And then very soon after that, got my first job at the BBC in Manchester.
All right. So it looks like you're going on a fairly sort of good path there. I mean, obviously, a director may not be as sort of the thing that you had in mind at that point, but certainly, media and studying about photography and videography, certainly, is sort of like a foundation for doing that. So, okay, well done. So, was there anyone else in the family in the similar line of work? Or?
No. No, I mean, I think as a family, we're fairly creative. Right. But I wouldn't say like there's nobody who's really gone down this like kind of line of work, I would say.
Right.
Like we're always interested in photography as a family, like all of us. Right. Like even back to my grandparents. So I think there's obviously some sort of interest or some sort of link there.
Right.
But nobody else in my family works in TV or film.
Oh, I see. Well, I'm sure they must be proud. Saying that's our Ben there. Did you know that's our Ben there?
Yeah, I would hope so.
Great. So, okay. So after your sort of higher education, and did you actually first think of directing, or did you think of being a cameraman after you sort of finished your uni? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I always enjoyed at university, like using cameras, working with cameras. And when I got my first job at the BBC, I think the team picked up on the fact that I could operate a camera. And so I was very fortunate to be able to use a camera on the very first like junior job that I had. I actually landed on my feet and got a job on a show where it included international travel, and I was working with an amazing team, and I could operate cameras as well, which was great.
Right. And did you find, obviously, being your first sort of like assignment, did you find it was like practically it was very different from the sort of academic stuff you studied earlier, or did it all sort of tie in quite nicely?
No, I mean, obviously there were elements of like my degree that I could bring into the job, but actually I do distinctly remember thinking, oh my God, like, I don't know what I'm doing here. Like, and I really do think that with this kind of job, you learn on the job. You know, you can study and you can do as much, work at home and work within a university environment, but it's not until you actually are on location on a job that you actually learn how to do it.
Mm-hmm. And in those early stages, did you find that the people around you, were they actually helpful, or did they think sort of, well, he must know what he's doing, we leave him to it?
No, I certainly had a lot of support from people who could obviously see that I had a bit of potential, but wanted to invest in that. And there's been a lot of people in my career who have, I would say, taken me under their wing and developed me. And now that I'm kind of a bit more senior in my career, like I'm hoping that I do the same, I give back and do the same with other junior members of staff.
Right, that's great. So when did this idea of being a director come to your life, into your sort of career?
It was never something that I was like focused on, like, oh, I want to be a director, this is what I want to do. Like, so I'd never really set my sights on that. But I guess it was a fairly normal career progression in factual TV. You start as a runner, then you become a researcher, an assistant producer, and then a producer director. And I think it was at that producer director level where I started getting some jobs where I was less hands-on. I wasn't operating cameras, but I was directing crew. So, from 2 cameras upwards. And I guess that's where I kind of developed my skills as a director. Both in what we call multicam environments, where we've got, you're directing multiple cameras in one location, to also like, documentary shoots, which are a lot smaller crews. You're often working with 1 or maybe 2 cameras. But I guess I just found that I had a skill for it, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Sure. And once you were in that sort of role of director, I know being a director, you've got to sort of be sort of like a juggler, really, because you've got the writer there on the one hand, and you've got your actors, and each probably has an idea as to how they want to sort of do things, and then sort of you're in the middle. And how do you manage sort of getting to that point where perhaps everyone's in agreement? Because I'm sure it can't always be easy.
No, it can't. And I think particularly in like factual TV, like you have to adapt. Like you can write a running order, you can write a kind of shooting script for what you're expecting it to be like, but actually the reality can often be very different. So I think you have to be ready to adapt. And that includes, taking on board other people's ideas. Like at no point do I think I've got all the ideas for how something is going to look. So I'm open to, suggestions from the team, or even suggestions from the talent as to how we should do things. I think you just have to be ready to change the story. If what you think you're about to shoot is different to actually what is happening, you have to be ready to kind of adapt and figure out a way to pivot and take the story in another direction.
Right. And have you come across situations where perhaps a writer may be very insistent upon a certain approach, but you happen to disagree? Have you ever had to deal with that sort of scenario, and sort of be flexible or perhaps stand your ground?
No, not necessarily in that context, but I think like having a relationship with maybe a series producer who would be in charge of writing scripts or things like that, so that you can feedback and go, actually, yes, I know what you wanted to try and get out of this scene, but the reality is this, or we weren't able to get it. I think it's important to have that relationship.
Right. And of course, all of that does involve a sort of like a creative, a creative process, which obviously every director has sort of a different approach to. I mean, in terms of the creative aspect of it, do you find that it's easy for others to understand where you're coming from, or are they sometimes a bit perplexed as to perhaps what you're trying to achieve there?
I mean, obviously I can't speak for other people, but normally I would say that with the teams that I work with, like we're always pretty well aligned on what we're trying to get out of a scene, whether that be, the director of photography or other kind of camera operators, or people who are more on the story side of things, really.
Right. And in terms of like current sort of trends in the industry, I mean, obviously there's a lot of use of AI and other sort of technical stuff. I mean, how are you managing to keep up with it, or do you sort of embrace it, or?
Yeah, I think AI is something to embrace. I mean, obviously there's a bit of fear around AI, and you read all of the kind of scaremonger stories that it's going to take our jobs. And, to a certain degree, like, yes, AI will take certain jobs, for example, transcription. We use transcription a lot when we do interviews and things like that. And that used to be someone's job to actually sit and transcribe an interview. Now you can get it done much quicker, much cheaper by AI. But I think there are certain tools that we currently use, which are incredibly helpful. And I would hope that, we as an industry, we embrace AI as a tool that helps us rather than, it becoming something that takes over essentially. Right.
Great. As a director, I mean, you would probably get approached by producers to sort of ask if you'd be willing to take on a project, and are there actually occasions when you yourself think of a great idea and you want to have it actually realized? Have you come across that situation, or is it always a case that someone approaches you to be the director?
Sorry, I'm just going to turn these lights off on because they're on a timer.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, I think that I Workerbee, the company that I work for and have worked for a number of years.
Yes.
When we're not actively on a project or in production with a project, a lot of the team then go into development, which is the kind of part of the business where we come up with new ideas and research new stories and things like that. So there've certainly been, development projects that I've, put forward and gone, this could be a brilliant documentary. Let's look at doing this. And, it's very hard to get ideas commissioned. But it's certainly like an exciting part of the process, figuring out what a new story is and finding out who those characters are and making those first approaches.
Right. And I suppose once you've been in the industry for some time, I suppose you sort of get that sort of credibility, and you probably would be in a position where you can actually, do something that's like from scratch in terms of a new project. Yeah, I'm sure. Right.
Yeah. Yeah,
Right.
certainly. Like you have to. It is that industry where it's based on things that you've done before or people that and I feel for junior members of our industry who struggle to get their foot through the door because they haven't necessarily got the experience that everybody is looking for. So I've been incredibly fortunate to be in that position where I've been trusted to do certain projects, and in doing so that has meant that I've got the kind of credentials to do other bigger projects.
Yes, absolutely. Just moving on to one of your previous works, the Peter Crouch documentary. How did that come about, and were you satisfied at the end that that you felt that it was basically what you wanted the end sort of work to be like?
Yeah. Well, to answer your first question, it came about because we were making, our company was making another project with Peter Crouch. So we made a series in which he worked with Dulwich Football Club to kind of save them from bankruptcy and things like that. I wasn't directly involved in that production, but off the back of that, we did a deal with Peter Crouch to tell his life story. And I remember being approached by my boss to say that he wanted me to direct it. And I was like, well, infamously, I'm not a football fan. I don't really like sports.
Right.
So that was my slight hesitation with it. But actually, I've done a number of sports documentaries now about sports stars. And actually, I think it's a real benefit not being too heavily invested in the sport itself, because I can very much tell the story of the person. And I think I can tell it in a kind of broader sense, so that ordinary people who aren't interested in football or a particular sport can, be invested in it and understand the story and relate to the story, hopefully. So, yeah, I mean, it was actually a pleasure to work on that project, because working with Peter and Abby, like they're such lovely people. They're so accommodating. And actually the story came together really well. I think because Peter is such a great character. He's such a natural talker. He's fun. He's funny. And so, yeah, the story came together really nicely.
Right. Is he really that tall, or is that all sort of
No, he's really that tall.
All right. Great. And were there any obstacles in your sort of that particular sort of work? Did any obstacle come around? Sometimes you get issues coming up, and there's sort of a bit of a delay or whatever. Or did that go quite smoothly in all respects? Or?
It went very smoothly. Yeah, I mean, there's always, like, in the field of documentary, and especially when you're working with big talent, there's always kind of setbacks and things like that. But actually, that was one of those documentaries where everything went pretty smoothly, I have to admit.
Oh, okay. Well done. And as you said, you're not particularly a sports fan, but having done that documentary, did that sort of position change at all in terms of your likeness or dislikeness for football?
In all honesty, Lee, no. Like, I have an appreciation for the talent that footballers have, I think. But I'm never going to be somebody who.
Well, I mean, like yourself. I mean, I'm not particularly enamored by football, but I used to be fascinated by the personalities like Maradona and George Best and these sort of chaps, and I wouldn't mind sort of looking at some of their football matches, but generally I'm like yourself, wasn't too much of a fan, but yeah, there you go. But I have to note that these days there are. Probably, I'm not quite sure what the reason for it is, but we tend to get less personalities sort of coming forward, in the sense that someone like George Best, those sort of guys that they had that sort of presence, they had that sort of something about them. They had that presence, and you'd be sort of locked onto them if they were in some sort of interview or speaking or whatever. I find that that's not so much the case these days. A lot of the sports people these days don't sort of grab you, don't sort of grab your attention as they used to do in back in like 20, 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think that's potentially true, but then I think if you look at the world of boxing and other fight sports, there's some huge personalities that are coming through still. I think it depends on the sport, doesn't it, and how the sport is, or how the sport wants to be portrayed, essentially.
Yes, that's right. Yes, that is an aspect. Yes, of course. Right. Well, moving on to one of your other productions, and that's Mega Build. I mean, you don't tell us about Mega Build, how that sort of came about.
Yeah, it's Supercar Mega Build. That was a very early one in my career. So I wasn't a series director on that, but I was a producer director. So you often have a number of producer directors on a show like that, where you may be responsible for particular stories or maybe a few episodes within a series, and you're responsible for not only kind of shooting it, but also coming up with the ideas for the content and the scripting and things like that. But you know, that was a great fun show to work on. Like, we were taking cars and we were modifying them to do crazy challenges. So yeah, that was a very enjoyable show to work on.
Right, that must have been, that must have been fun. I mean, but is cars one of your sort of pet fancies? Are there? Did you like supercars yourself? Or?
I like cars. I like, you know, automotive design. I think in the world of TV, there's always something quite exciting about working with cars, like, because there's so many kind of facets that you can look at, whether it's, you know, in a garage and you're modifying cars, or you're restoring cars, or whether you're on the track and doing, you know, a fun driving sequence. So actually, it's a very kind of visual genre to work in.
Right, interesting. Yeah, very good. I mean, and going on to your well, one that I particularly liked, and I'm a great sort of admirer of, and that was your Bruno versus Tyson documentary. How did you like that? That was a big big project to take on. And how did you were you approached by Sky Productions? Or?
Yeah, so we as a company came up with the idea of telling the story of the two rivals. I think that it's always a very successful genre when you can take two rivals and tell their kind of stories. And yeah, like we do with most kind of ideas that we come up with, we pitch it round to various kind of broadcasters and channels, and Sky Documentaries were the one that were interested in investing in it. So yeah, once we had that commission, again, it was another thing of me saying, well, I'm not a boxing fan. Like, I don't follow boxing at all. I'm aware of these two characters, but actually that had a huge benefit when it came to telling their story. But yeah, that was my first feature documentary that I made. It came with its own unique challenges because we were making it during COVID. So it wasn't like we could do, you know, what we would normally do. We couldn't go out on the road and interview people. We had to kind of come up with a way of getting people's interviews without going to visit them. So we came up with quite a clever idea to just do audio interviews with people, and we would post them a sort of microphone kit that they could use at home, and I would interview them, you know, kind of like we're doing now, remotely. And we just made that kind of a feature of the documentary. So it meant that we stayed immersed in the amazing archive footage that there is from that era of boxing. And we just heard the voices of these other contributors who we'd interviewed.
Right. That's. I mean, so did you actually go out to Mike Tyson's residence, and I believe you made some footage there of.
Yeah.
When Frank goes, you know, comes out of his car and they go inside.
Yeah, that's right. He was actually on holiday, so we flew to Miami to meet Tyson, and we had. I think we only had 2 hours with him. That was all he could spare, because I believe his daughter had a tennis lesson while they were on holiday, so he had to go after 2 hours. So it was quite the whirlwind trip, but we managed to squeeze a lot into that, you know, short space of time. I think we were just like incredibly lucky to go with Frank on that journey, because he hadn't really spoken to Tyson since his defeat. And so it was quite, you know, kind of, it was a big moment for him, and it was very humbling for us to be part of that journey. And it was great to see the two of them almost bury the hatchet, I guess. Yes.
No, I mean, I know Frank. You know, we met many times, and great guy, and very humble and very polite. And I haven't had a chance to meet Mike yet, but I did know his business manager, Steve Lott. He's like a very nice friend of mine, and he unfortunately passed away in 2021. He had an epileptic fit at home, but great guy, Steve. He was a guy who used to sort of in his first championship fights. He was a guy who used to sort of hold his belts up aloft and walk into the ring with him, and very knowledgeable. Bill Caton, they were very knowledgeable about boxing. Did you? did you speak to? I mean, did you get a chance to speak to Mike and assess, him as a sort of subject of this documentary? Were you able to speak to him? How did you find Mike Tyson?
Do you know what? On the day that we were filming with him, he was really lovely, really polite, and he was quite in awe of Frank Bruno, actually, I think. So yeah, but I mean, although we only had a short space of time to actually film with Mike, I spent the best part of a year going through all of Mike's, archive footage and things like that,
Right.
to be able to tell his story, and what an incredible man he is.
Right. So it took a lot of preparation. I mean, I shouldn't be surprised by that, but it looks like you did your homework quite well.
Yeah, I mean, these archive footage-led films, they take months and months and months to actually just sit and go through thousands of tapes, to try and find the best moments that you want to work into your film.
Right. And how did you sort of did you use some technique to sort of build up the build up the momentum and build up this sort of beating between them? And is that why you looked at the previous footage to see to sort of, it was almost like they're going to fight again sort of thing, it's like they're coming together, but how did that sort of come across?
It was, I mean, obviously, like, they had quite a natural, what we would call, story arc, and we only focused on the dates kind of around when they first fought up to the point where they fought the second time. So that really kind of focused our search when we were searching for the footage. But yeah, I mean, one of the things that was interesting to do was kind of plot their story together. So,
Yes.
we did Frank's timeline, and then we did Mike's timeline, and then we put them together, and we saw the moments where, like, their lives came together. I think there's a scene in there where I think it's Sports Personality of the Year, and Tyson is awarded, I think it's an international award or something like that. But that footage we actually found quite late in the process of making the film. But actually, it's such a brilliant scene because the BBC almost humiliate Frank Bruno in front of Mike Tyson. So it was finding all of those moments where their lives coordinated to tell the best story.
Yes, and probably when they were together, you probably noticed the sort of the great difference in size between Frank Bruno and Mike Tyson. Were you surprised by that?
I guess not surprised, but yes, there obviously is a size difference. Mike is very kind of small and stocky. Not that I would say that to his face, but yes, there obviously is quite a size difference.
Yeah, well, I said it because when we watch boxing on TV, the differences in height are not actually that sort of apparent. When you see them sort of in real life, it's just it's just probably more pronounced.
Yes.
Yeah, and of course, that in itself probably lays testament to Mike's incredible abilities because Frank is like 6'3", 6'4", and a huge guy, and for Mike to succeed in stopping him fairly early on in their matches just goes to show how talented he was.
Yes, yeah, for sure. I mean, you look at his whole career, and like, there's no denying his talent.
Yes, I think the issue, we sort of sidetracking here about boxing. I like talking about boxing, so sidetrack in the sense that a lot of people say, oh well, he doesn't deserve to be a great and blah 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 and this and that, and I think it's probably because Mike Tyson peaked very very early for someone who's coming to heavyweight boxing. He peaked very early, and unfortunately, he things happened in his personal life that sort of sidetracked him. But there's no denying his talent and his achievements. I mean, still, his record still stands after 40, 50 years, I think it is. His record still stands, the youngest heavyweight of all time. And I think he definitely does deserve to be up there in the top 10. Yeah.
Of course. I mean, I think you sort of hit the nail on the head. Like, the struggles that he's had in his personal life often take away from people who, I guess, they often muddy the waters in terms of his skill and his talent. But I think if you were to look at his boxing career, despite all of the things that happened in his personal life, like, what a kind of career he's had. There's no
Yes.
denying that he's one of the greats.
Mhm. That's right. And you know, the thing I find about Mike is he's one of the. I mean, I've acted for a lot of, you know, well-known boxers, and
Mm.
the thing I find a bit different about Mike is that he has that sort of presence. You know,
Mm.
if you look at Mike in an interview, you sort of immediately sort of you know, he sort of hypnotizes you to you know,
Mm.
to an extent. You know, so you have to listen to what he says, and whatever he says is always like words of wisdom, and you know, he comes out with these things that, you know, you don't expect a boxer to say, and
Yeah.
you know, he has that sort of attraction about him, and I think that's why, even though Lennox Lewis, you know, probably was you know, more successful career, and probably technically you know, better boxer, but you know, he doesn't have that same sort of you know, ability or attraction that Mike has.
Yeah, I just think that they're very different people.
Mm.
You know, I've been in the room with both of them, and like
Mm.
they both have a presence, certainly.
Mm.
Like, but I know what you mean when you say like the presence around Mike Tyson is very different.
Very different.
And like we certainly felt that when we were filming with him in Miami.
Mhm. Yeah, and I suppose we have to credit Costamato for that, because he took him as a very young boy and made him read lots and lots and lots of books. So
Mhm.
Mike's actually a very knowledgeable person. You know, you wouldn't probably expect that, but he made him read books and all sorts of things like Alexander the Great and Hannibal and these sort of things. And so he's actually, you know, a very knowledgeable guy. He's just not just a person who beats up people. Yes, he did.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, did you find? Would you say that that documentary was probably one of the most challenging that you had to do, or not really? Was it a bit more straightforward than you anticipated?
No, it wasn't straightforward, I wouldn't say. I mean,
Mm.
from a personal point of view, like it was the first time that I was making a feature documentary, so, you know, 90-minute film.
Mm. Mm.
Um, it was the first time that I'd worked with that much archive material.
Right.
Um, so I think like personally it had a lot of challenges. But it's one that I'm really, really proud of because as I say, you know, it did really well for Sky Documentaries.
Yes. Yeah.
And you know, even to this day, I get people, you know, like yourself who say like they're a big fan
Yes.
of that film and how
Mm.
much they enjoyed it.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. That was really a very, very good production, and
Thank you.
very good directing from yourself. Um,
Thank
Now we're going to go on to your other more recent production. That also involves Frank, but we're going to come on to that a bit later on.
you. Mm,
But we're just going to go for a small break now, and do stay with us. We'll be back very shortly. Fascinating to speak to Ben, and we're
thank you.
going to carry on after the break. Do
Okay,
stay
thank
with
you.
us. Thank you. We've got the important person, obviously, is Ben. He's here, and it was a fascinating first part of the show. We had some great words of wisdom and recollections of how Ben, in fact, managed to get to this very great position of having done some great works of documentaries, and so far it's been fascinating. And let's carry on. Yes, Ben. So we were talking about the Mike Tyson, Frank Bruno documentary, and a great piece of work it is. And have you thought of doing something again similar? I know you're doing the Four Kings at the moment, but perhaps with Mike Tyson again, perhaps something similar with him again. Have you thought about that at all? Or?
Do you know what? I mean, we would love to do something with Mike Tyson again. I mean, it's not something that we're actively exploring, but yeah, look, we're always on the lookout for amazing stories, and there's so many of them within the sporting world.
Okay, sure. Well, hopefully something will come about. And now, sort of moving on to your Janet Jackson miniseries. Obviously, she's an icon in the musical world, and a great sort of work to be involved in. How did you feel about that when that was first sort of when you first sort of got to know about it?
Well, it started life as a very different proposition. Like, Janet's team had put out a kind of tender where they wanted somebody to just go and film behind the scenes of her latest tour. You know, it's something that I've since found she's done on every single tour. So she has a film team who follow her and the rest of her crew around, capturing what goes on behind the scenes. And that's how it started life. And I remember the first few weeks when I flew out to LA. Actually, no, it was Louisiana at first. Flew out to Louisiana to film her rehearsals. And I mean, at first I was kind of awestruck at like working with her and, you know, being part of this big machine, which was like, I'd never seen anything like it before. So I was obviously very honored to have that job. But I remember like ringing back to my boss back in the UK going, you know, I'm not getting very much here. There's not very much going on. Like it is literally just behind the scenes. And for somebody like Janet Jackson, who's done touring for, you know, years, there's no real drama there, that nothing really goes wrong. There's no real story there. So as interesting as it was for me, actually the kind of broader sense of like, what is the story here? Like there wasn't much of a story. And in our minds, myself and my boss, Rick, like we always wanted to push for something more than just a kind of tour film. We always, I think, had in the back of our minds that we wanted to try and do Janet's life story, essentially, or some sort of biographical, you know, story. So that's what I was trying to start to push for in the early few weeks of working with Janet. And eventually, I think it was probably 2 or 3 weeks into me filming with her, like she agreed for me to interview her. And she said she would give me half an hour of her time. That's all she had, which I was obviously extremely grateful for. But anyway, that interview managed to last probably about 2.5, 3 hours. And, you know, we had a very, I feel it was a great, like in-depth conversation, you know, about her life. And I remember after that interview ringing Rick, my boss, the next day and going, okay, we've got something here. And it kind of developed from there, you know, using the footage that I captured on the first part of her tour. You know, we created what we call a sizzle, which is kind of like a taster tape, I guess, to go to broadcasters and networks to go, look, we've got this amazing access with Janet Jackson. This is the story she wants to tell. And it took quite a while for us to actually secure a broadcaster to actually, you know, invest in the film. But eventually, Lifetime and A&E came on board to do it, and I guess the rest is history.
Right. So you had the idea first, and then you went and saw her, and after that is when you looked at sort of like major sort of funding for it. Is that the case?
Yeah, the normal model that we work with is, you know, you come up with an idea and, you know, we might invest some of our own money into it as a company, or, you know, we sometimes get a development fund from broadcasters. But we use that to kind of come up with the idea and secure access to a particular person or a particular company if it's about that. And then we take that to broadcasters and networks who then decide whether they want to invest in it or not.
Right, right. And of course, these sort of things do depend upon, you know, budget constraints and that sort of thing, and production schedules. You know, obviously she's on a tour, so how did you manage to deal with all that?
Yeah, I mean, at first, because the first kind of block of filming that I did with her, which was, I guess, 6 months on and off, you know, that was, we hadn't got anybody on board yet to be commissioners, so we were funding that ourselves. But we believed so much in the idea that we were like, it's worth the kind of investment and the costs of, you know, me being out there in America filming with her at this stage. It's worth that investment, because we believed in the products that we could make, I guess, and in, you know, in the great film that we could make. But yeah, I mean, scheduling wise, you know, when she's on tour, it's incredibly difficult. Sorry, these lights keep turning off. Sorry, I was talking about schedule. It's, you know, it's incredibly hard when her day-to-day schedule is her tour. And obviously with the tour, it's very repetitive. Like, she turns up at a venue, she gets ready, she performs, she goes to the next venue. And obviously a lot of the time we were trying to coordinate our filming plans with where she was on tour. So for example, there was one day which is featured in the documentary where we did manage to get her to go back to Gary, Indiana, which was where the whole family grew up. And, you know, I'd hoped that we would do more days like that, where we could take her away from the tour to take her back to, you know, places of significance in her story.
Yes, yes. Very interesting. And of course, being a sort of larger than life character as Janet Jackson is, I mean, how do you sort of take all that in? Because someone like that is obviously you don't get to see sort of, you know, she's a very sort of, you know, special sort of person in that sense that. You know, she obviously being the sister of Michael Jackson, and that whole family, you know, has a whole history of being entertainers and being in the music industry, and it must have felt quite, you know, like quite awesome, and you know, quite probably you had to probably pinch yourself a bit, probably, I would have thought.
Oh yeah, a number of times I had to. It was I do remember like touching down in America. I think it was the day I arrived, and within a couple of hours of me being there, like, Janet was actually on the phone directly to me, and I was like, wow, I didn't expect this to happen. I thought I would deal with a member of her team or something like that. That was one of those kind of pinch me moments.
Right.
But I was just incredibly like honored that she let me tell her story, essentially.
Right. Do you think that some aspect of, I know a lot of Americans sometimes they like speaking to English people, and did she sort of did she at all indicate that sort of preference? I know that, you know, certain number of interviews I've seen that, you know, where it's an English person interviewing, that the American person seems quite sort of, you know, delighted that they're being interviewed by an English person. Did that sort of come across at all? Or?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think there's a certain quality standard of you know, documentaries that we make in the UK, so that was probably something. I think she quite liked as well the fact I was a little bit cheeky with her. Like, I wasn't afraid to ask the difficult questions. I wasn't afraid to like push her slightly, and we kind of developed this relationship where she would say to me, you know, Ben, you've got one question, and she knew that I was going to push my luck and try and get, you know, 5 questions in. And it obviously, like, I didn't push my boundaries too much with her, but it just we had that kind of nice dynamic where she knew what I was like, and actually I think there was a bit of her that enjoyed that.
Right, excellent, excellent. I think the fact that you don't have a heavy Mancunian accent either is probably helped as
Yeah,
well.
probably helped.
Right, right. And I mean, but that particular that was like a 4-part mini series, I believe, and in terms of in terms of how you sort of approached it, in terms of as you said, with the tour dates and all that, and would you say that was quite challenging in that respect? Was it to put up everything together because of all the different aspects, and were there obviously other things as well, whereby how much of the music did you in fact incorporate into your documentary? I mean, was that element as well that was had to be sort of sensitively handled?
Yeah, less so the music. I think the approach that we had with the storytelling was very chronological. So, it started, with when Janet was born, and it brought you right up to the present day. And it told the story in quite a chronological way. Obviously, like when it's a series like that, you have to think of what your hooks are at the end of an episode, what your cliffhangers are going to be, and try and structure your episodes in a way that they keep the viewer invested in it. I think so. That's one of those challenges. I think like the use of music isn't too challenging, but I think with documentaries about celebrities, I would say, not just musicians but celebrities, it's very easy just to create what we would call a puff piece, which is just featuring all of their achievements and accolades and their greatest hits, that sort of thing. And so I think we were constantly conscious of that actually we didn't want to go and just make a puff piece. We wanted to create something that delved a bit deeper into her story and told the viewer something that they didn't already know. And I think that was quite challenging at times for Janet because she has had struggles in her life, and we wanted to talk about those. But it meant fostering that kind of relationship between me and her where she felt safe enough to open up.
Right. And did that series involve any sort of more sort of current filmmaking technology or techniques which you felt would be amenable to that particular type of documentary, or was it just the usual techniques that you used anyway in your other sort of productions?
Yeah, it was pretty standard, I would say. I mean, I think the biggest technical feat that we had to overcome was Janet has this like vast archive of tapes and reel-to-reel tapes and DVDs and CDs and every type of media you can think of. She's got this room in LA where all of her archives are held, and it's quite something to walk into it. It's pretty amazing. But obviously we wanted to see pretty much every one of those tapes to find the needles in the haystack.
Right.
And the process of that involved her team in America boxing up every single one of those tapes and shipping them to me in Manchester. And actually, again, this was during COVID, so they were being delivered to my house rather than to our office. And we had to painstakingly not only get them digitized, so digitizing the tapes and everything, but then sit through hours and hours and hours of Janet's footage to find those moments which we thought were gold.
Right.
My edit assistant I had on that job must have sat through thousands of tapes. She did an amazing job, but we do know there were over 3,000 tapes that were watched through.
Right. So I mean, so a large part of the document did depend upon archived footage. But what about your sort of the live sort of footage that you did make? I mean, did it require any sort of particular style of cinematography, or did you have to sort of communicate certain things to your director of photography, or was it something that just naturally sort of fell into place?
It sort of naturally fell into place, simply because the style of it was very what we call in the industry run and gun. So most of the filming, our original filming on that series, was actually just me and a camera, and that was it. So it was very it was quite an intimate way of working, but actually often that way of working when you've got a small crew or even just a crew of one means that you get better performances or you get a better relationship with the person that you're filming with, because there isn't such a great team around, you know, the likes of Janet. You know, she often finds it hard opening up when there's loads of people around her, but when it's just, you know, myself, often she forgets about the camera and she can just talk more openly.
Right. Great. And in terms of like how you obviously you had a lot of footage there, so was it easy editing it, or were you sort of like spending a lot longer than you thought because you wanted certain parts in, but you wanted, considering how to sort of, how to sort of cut it down? I mean, how was the editing part of it for that particular production?
Yeah, I mean, the edit process took an entire year, I think. I think we started it in the January and then it was on air in the January. So yeah, it took an entire year. We had 4 edit suites running, I think. But yeah, I mean, it's the same process with all kind of shows that you make. You know, your editors want to make sure that they've watched through everything, because there will be a lot that hits the cutting room floor, but it's essential that they watch everything to make sure that they're finding the golden moments in the footage that you've got, whether that be the footage that we shot or the archive footage.
Yes.
I think, yeah, I mean, it was a pretty standard edit, in which, you know, we use up all of the time that we have available to us. And, you know, even January, I remember the beginning of the January, it was due to go out, I think, on the 22nd of January, but even like the first few weeks in January, we were still editing it, and Janet was still giving us notes right up until 24 hours until it was on TV. So the end of the edit schedule always gets very hectic.
Yes, I can imagine. Yeah, it's rather like accountants in January. There's all sort of flurry of activity before they have to do their
yes, before your deadline.
That's right. Yes. Right. Okay. And in terms of the team you had around you, I know you said that it was mostly yourself with the camera, but I'm sure there's always like a team of people there that you rely on for something like that. I mean, is this team like, you know, built up over a period of time, or they were quite new to you? Or?
I think with that one, I mean, at Workerbee, we have like a core team of people that have worked with us for a long time. And actually our working relationship is always great because, you know, for example, we have a great team of production managers who are responsible for dealing with the money and the logistics and things like accommodation and lots of things behind the scenes that they're not necessarily reflected on the screen in the footage that we show, but actually they're such an essential part of making any production. And so like without them, we couldn't make these kind of films. We couldn't do these kind of projects. And so, yeah, on that one, you know, most of the team was in the UK. And I was checking in with them on, you know, every single day to tell them, like, you know, where the tour was going next and where I needed a hotel and if I needed more money and that sort of thing.
Yes, of course. I mean, in probably most of your, well, all of your probably, works that you've done. I mean, do you find that you had like an artistic vision, which perhaps sometimes conflicted with commercial viability, and how do you deal with those sort of scenarios?
I think whenever you do a project like this, there's always different people involved in it who want something different out of the project. So, you know, you work with commissioning editors at the networks who have one idea of what they want it to be and the stories that they want to capture. And then there's us kind of in the middle of that. And equally, like, there were people, for example, on Janet's team who had some sort of editorial say in it, and what they want it to be is very different from what we want it to be. So I think it's it's trying to find that harmony where everybody who's invested in the project is happy with what you are creating, but ultimately as a filmmaker, like, you don't want to give away your editorial control on it, because like that's your job as a filmmaker, is to tell a story, and it's to represent that story in as balanced a way as possible.
Right. And going back to your work of, that you did with Idris Elba, that was much more sort of down to earth sort of thing. Also, although Idris is obviously a well known actor, in his own sort of capacity, but the issue of Idris trying to get these youngsters, motivated to come to his kickboxing club, and how did that all sort of fall into place?
We'd worked with Idris over a number of years on various different projects where we'd kind of put him through the challenge. So we did a project on Discovery Channel called No Limits, where he was being put to the test in various vehicles. So he learned to be a rally driver. He learned to drive a drag car on a drag strip. There were a couple of other ones. I think he learned to fly a plane. Sorry, let me turn these lights on. Sorry about this. So yeah, we'd done that project, and then from off the back of that, we had a conversation with Idris where he told us that actually he used to train in kickboxing. Wow. And so we pitched to him doing, a professional fight and training for it over the space of a year, and we would document it. So we made a documentary again for Discovery Channel called Fighter, Idris Elba Fighter.
Right.
And then obviously off the back of that, we thought, well, how else could we utilize Idris? Like, how else could we work with him? And the idea came about of him sort of mentoring young people who didn't have any experience necessarily in fighting or sports, but actually seeing that fight sports often come with a lot of discipline. And so that was the idea. Idris would train these youngsters with various like experts in the field to take part in a proper boxing match, but in order to kind of learn some discipline, essentially. Right.
Yeah, that was very, very good, very good production, and I'm sure it's inspired a lot of people to come into kickboxing. Yeah, very good.
Yeah, I hope
so. Now the problem is, Ben, that you had so much to say that it was so sort of fascinating and interesting that I'm afraid we've come to the end of the show, and we've not even had a chance to discuss your last work, which is the Four Kings one. I think we'll have to have you back on again, I'm afraid. Ben, we can't let you go without discussing Four Kings. So,
but so if anybody wants to watch it, it's on Amazon. So it's the story of Lennox Lewis, Frank Bruno, Chris Eubank, and Nigel Benn.
Yes, that's a great sort of topic to have, actually. To have those guys on there.
Yeah.
I really must thank you a lot, Benjamin, for coming on, and you really enlightened, I think, a lot of our listeners and viewers in terms of how sort of a director works and the issues and the things that he has to deal with, and it's been really, really great to have you on. Thank you very much.
Well, no, thank you for having me, and it's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you very much, and I look forward to perhaps having you back on again in the future.
Yes, I'd like that. Thank you.
It would be great. Thank you very much, Benjamin.
Thank you.
Right, so that's the end of the show for the Mahtab Aziz Celebrity Lawyer Show. Have a good evening, and I'll see you back here next week. Thank you.